Imagine a woman who gave everything for love, only to be laughed at in the end. This is her story, on Real Stories Diary. Abeni sat in court, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the finality of it. Across the table, Musa leaned back in his chair, smirking like he had won. He tapped the pen twice before signing the divorce papers with flair, chuckling, "Finally, I'm free from your deadweight." The room went quiet, until the judge cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, there's one more financial detail to read." And with each word, Musa's smile cracked. Because Abeni wasn't walking out broke. She was walking out richer than he'd ever be. Can you guess how she turned her pain into power? Stay with Real Stories Diary to find out. Abeni met Musa when she was just 22 years old. She was young, full of love, and believed in building a future together. From the moment they started dating, she gave everything to support him. Musa had big dreams of starting his own tech company, and Abeni stood right beside him. She had her own dream, too, to start a fashion brand. But she put it aside because she thought helping him succeed was more important. She worked long hours at the bank during the day, came home to cook and clean, and still managed to be his biggest cheerleader. When they couldn't pay the rent, Abeni didn't complain. She quietly sold her jewelry to keep them going. She believed that's what true love looked like. That's what being a partner meant. She thought, if he rises, we rise together. She didn't feel weak for sacrificing. She thought she was doing the right thing. She trusted that all the love, time, and effort she gave would one day come back to her. What she didn't know was that while she was lifting him, Musa was slowly forgetting who helped him climb. But even then, Abeni kept her eyes open. She stayed quiet. She watched. She remembered everything. When Musa's app became successful, everything in his life changed. News channels started calling him for interviews. He was invited to big conferences. Money came in fast, and people began treating him like a star. But as his world grew bigger, Abeni's presence in it became smaller. The man who once held her hand in public now walked ahead of her like she didn't exist. He stopped calling her his wife. At parties, he introduced her as someone who just helps around. People didn't know she had once stayed up late, helping him build that dream. They didn't know she had given up everything for him. To them, she was just part of the background. Someone who brought drinks, smiled politely, and stayed quiet. It hurt, but Abeni stayed silent. She watched as he laughed loudly with new friends, pretending like she was never part of his story. And then one evening, she heard something that cut deeper than anything before. In front of a group of his friends, Musa laughed and said, "Abeni?" She was just a phase. They all laughed with him. No one looked at her face. No one saw the pain in her eyes. She stood there, holding a tray of snacks, feeling smaller than ever. It was like she had become invisible. The man she loved, the one she had believed in, now acted like she was just someone passing through his life, someone he had outgrown. He didn't see the woman who had been with him when he had nothing. He didn't see her sacrifices, her strength, or her love. He only saw her as someone who no longer fit in his new world. But Abeni didn't scream. She didn't cry in front of them. She simply took it all in. Every word, every laugh, every moment he made her feel like she was nothing. She stood still, but inside, something had started to change. Her heart was breaking, yes. But behind that pain, a quiet fire was starting to burn. And even though Musa couldn't see it yet, Abeni was slowly waking up. She was remembering who she was before she gave everything up for him. And this time, she wasn't going to disappear. What happens when a woman decides to reclaim her power? Keep listening to Real Stories Diary. One night, Abeni couldn't sleep. Musa had come home late again and gone straight to the living room to make a phone call. She didn't mean to listen, but his voice was loud. Something in his tone made her stop in the hallway and listen closely. She heard him laughing with someone on the phone, one of his close friends, someone who used to visit when they were still struggling. But what Musa said next made her whole body freeze. He laughed again and said, "Abeni, please. She's sweet, but I deserve better now. A woman who matches my level. For a moment, Abeni stood still. She held her breath. Her heart didn't break loudly. It cracked in complete silence. She waited to feel the tears, to fall apart, to scream. But none of that happened. She just stood there, feeling like a ghost in her own home. Then, slowly, she turned around and walked to the small room that used to be her little creative space. It had been 6 years since she last opened the laptop sitting in the corner. 6 years since she gave up her dream of becoming a fashion designer. 6 years since she put Musa first in everything. That night, she dusted it off and turned it on. She searched through the old folders until she found the one that still had her name in it. Dream Designs by Abeni. She clicked it open, and her old sketches appeared. Bright colors, bold shapes, beautiful ideas. Her past looked back at her, untouched, waiting. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to smile. Not a smile of happiness, but one of quiet power. That folder was her, the real her. The one who had dreams before being told to dim them. The one who believed in her own hands before she started using them only to serve others. She didn't say anything to Musa that night. She didn't tell him she had heard everything. She just stayed calm, knowing something inside her had changed forever. If he thought she wasn't enough, that was fine. She wasn't going to argue. She wasn't going to cry. She was going to rise. Not to prove him wrong, but to remind herself that she had always been more than someone's phase. And while Musa laughed with his friends, thinking she was still in the shadows, Abeni was already stepping back into her light. For the next 18 months, Abeni lived 2 lives. During the day, she stayed quiet, did her usual tasks, and acted like everything was normal. But every night, when the house went silent and Musa fell asleep, she opened her laptop. She would sit for hours, sometimes until the early morning, sketching new designs, watching tutorials, and learning how to build a fashion business. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. No one knew she was slowly rebuilding the dream she once buried. Her hands moved with purpose. Her heart filled with quiet determination. She didn't use her real name. Instead, she picked a new name, something that sounded bold, powerful, and unknown. Under that name, she started her first digital fashion line. She opened a small online store. Bit by bit, people began to notice. Orders came in. Comments praised the unique styles. She responded politely, hiding her true identity. All this happened while she still played the role of the quiet wife during the day. Meanwhile, Musa had started a podcast. He liked to talk about business success and his journey. Often, he made jokes about women trying to start companies. He laughed with his guests, saying things like, "These so-called female founders, most of them are just playing dress up." Abeni would sit in the corner, pretending to scroll through her phone, listening to every word. He didn't know the woman he was mocking was sitting just a few feet away, quietly building something bigger than he could ever imagine. Sometimes his words hurt. But she used that pain as fuel. Each time he looked down on women like her, she worked harder. She knew she couldn't stop. Not now. She wasn't building a brand just to get revenge. She was building to prove to herself that she still had value, that her voice still mattered. And the best part? He had no idea. Every time Musa walked past her without noticing, every time he laughed at his own jokes on the podcast, Abeni kept her calm. She didn't need him to see her. Not yet. Because soon, the world would. And when that day came, it wouldn't be loud. It would be silent, just like how she had started. But this time, the silence would speak louder than all of Musa's words. One afternoon, Abeni decided to surprise Musa by bringing him lunch at his office. It was something she used to do often in the early days, just to show love and support. She packed his favorite meal, took a cab, and walked into the building with a small smile, hoping maybe they could have a quiet lunch together. But when she arrived at his office, Musa wasn't there. Instead, his secretary was sitting at the desk. Abeni had seen her before, but never spoken to her directly. The woman looked up, clearly surprised to see Abeni. Then, after a quick glance at the lunch bag, she smirked and leaned back in her chair. Her baby bump was now showing, and Abeni's eyes couldn't help but notice it. Before Abeni could even ask anything, the woman laughed and said, "You're the wife? Wow. He told me you were just his sick cousin." Abeni's heart sank. She stood still, holding the food in her hands, her mind racing, but her face calm. That one sentence was like a slap. Not just from the woman, but from the man she had given everything to. All the long nights, the sacrifices, the love, and this was what he gave her in return. Lies, betrayal, and now a baby with another woman who didn't even know the truth about who she really was. But even in that moment, Abeni didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry or argue. She just looked at the woman, nodded once, and turned around. She walked out of that office with slow, steady steps, not because she was weak, but because something inside her had finally broken. Not her heart, but the shell that had been holding her back for too long. As soon as she stepped outside, she took a deep breath, pulled out her phone, and called her lawyer. Her voice was calm. "It's time," she said. That moment wasn't the end of her. It was the beginning of her finally choosing herself. She didn't need more proof. She had seen enough. Musa had lied, cheated, and thrown away everything they had built. But now, it was her turn. She wasn't going to beg, cry, or ask him why. She was done. The woman he thought would never leave had already started walking away. When Abeni filed for divorce, Musa thought he had already won. He walked around with a proud smile, telling his friends that she would soon come running back, begging for help or money. He laughed at the idea of her surviving without him. In his mind, she was still the quiet wife who stayed in the background, someone who had no life outside of him. He even told people that she'd ask for alimony, and he planned to reject her to teach her a lesson. But what Musa didn't know was that Abeni had been preparing for this moment. She had worked in silence for 18 months, building her business under a different name, a name Musa never cared to ask about. While he mocked women entrepreneurs on his podcast, Abeni became one of the most successful ones in the country, all without him noticing. On the day of the divorce hearing, Musa walked into court like a man who had already won the case. He wore expensive clothes, sunglasses, and a smug look. He whispered to his lawyer, "Just get it done. She has nothing." But when the judge asked Abeni's side if there were any financial details to declare, her lawyer stood up and handed over a thick file. Inside were bank statements, income records, and official documents showing ownership of a fast-rising fashion company, ABN Studio. The company was already doing brand deals, had investors, and was recently valued at $18 million. The name shocked everyone. Musa blinked in confusion. "ABN Studio," he whispered. It sounded familiar, like something he had heard before in passing, but never paid attention to. And then it hit him. The woman he thought was just sitting quietly at home was the one behind a growing empire. The woman he thought would be nothing without him had become something far greater than he ever expected. Abeni didn't look at him with anger. She didn't smirk or brag. She just sat there, calm and proud. Because for her, the divorce wasn't a loss. It was her doorway to freedom. It wasn't the end of a sad story. It was the beginning of her new one. She had walked away from pain, betrayal, and disrespect and stepped straight into power, purpose, and success. She didn't need his money. She didn't want anything from him, because she already had everything, built by her own hands. And the best part? He never even saw it coming. The day of the final divorce hearing had arrived. The courtroom was quiet, but filled with tension. Musa walked in confidently, wearing expensive sunglasses and a wide smile. He looked around like he owned the room, nodding at people and even laughing a little, as if this was just another easy win for him. He leaned over to his lawyer and whispered, "Just hand her the papers. She's not getting a thing." He truly believed that Abeni had nothing to her name. No power, no wealth, no voice. Abeni sat on the other side of the room, calm and quiet. She didn't wear anything flashy. There was no makeup to cover the tiredness from months of building something in secret, but in her eyes, there was strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout. The judge entered, took his seat, and began reading through the formalities. Then he looked directly at Abeni and asked, "Do you have any assets or claims to declare before we proceed?" The room went still. Musa looked up, a little confused. He wasn't expecting her to say anything. Abeni slowly stood, reached into her bag, and pulled out a folder. She handed it to her lawyer, who gave it to the judge. Inside the folder were all the documents, proof of ownership, earnings, investments, and partnerships. Everything connected to ABN Studio was listed, page after page. The courtroom was quiet as the judge began to read through it. People leaned forward, curious. Even Musa took off his sunglasses, his smile fading. As the judge continued, it became clear that Abeni wasn't the weak woman Musa had described to everyone. She wasn't poor, and she definitely wasn't powerless. She was the owner of a fast-growing fashion company, one that was already working with international brands and investors. The numbers were impressive, the paperwork was solid, and the look on Musa's face said it all. Shock, disbelief, and a bit of fear. For Abeni, that courtroom wasn't just a legal place. It became her stage, not because she wanted to embarrass Musa, but because it was the first time her truth was finally spoken out loud. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply let the truth speak for itself. And it did, louder than anything Musa had said about her. She had walked in as the woman he once tried to silence. But now, she stood tall as the woman the entire room had to respect. As the judge continued reading the documents Abeni had submitted, the entire courtroom became silent. The judge listed earnings, international brand deals, and future expansion plans tied to a fashion company called ABN Studio. Every sentence made the room feel heavier, and Musa's expression started to change. His smile was gone. The confidence in his eyes faded. He leaned forward, confused, almost like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. The judge mentioned big numbers, revenue in millions, signed deals with top brands, and plans to expand the business into more countries. Everyone in the courtroom looked surprised, but no one more than Musa. His face turned pale, and he kept looking at Abeni like she was someone he had never met before. Finally, he leaned closer to her and whispered, "ABN Studio is yours?" Abeni turned her head slowly. This time, there was no sadness in her eyes, no anger, no fear, only calm. And then she smiled. Her first real smile in years. A smile that came not from revenge, but from finally standing in her truth. She looked at him and said softly, "It always was. You just never asked." That moment hit him harder than anything else. For years, she had been beside him, silent, invisible, forgotten. But the whole time, she had been building something powerful. And the worst part? He never once noticed. He never asked her what she was working on. Never cared about her dreams. Never believed she could do something on her own. Now, in front of everyone, he had to sit and listen to the success story of the woman he had laughed at, ignored, and betrayed. He realized too late that she wasn't just his quiet wife. She was a force, and she didn't need his name or his money to become something great. She had done it all on her own, quietly, smartly, and without him. Musa sat back in his chair, stunned, speechless. Abeni didn't look back again. She didn't need to. Her words had said enough. She had always been the real strength in the story. He just never saw it. Now, the world did, and it was his turn to feel what it was like to be invisible. After everything came out in court, Abeni had the chance to take a lot from Musa. She could have asked for the house. She could have claimed the cars, the furniture, the money they once shared. Legally, she had the right. Many people expected her to take revenge, to destroy him the way he tried to break her. But she didn't. Abeni didn't want the house. That house held too many memories. Memories of pain, silence, and being ignored. She didn't want the car either. It was just another thing Musa used to show off. Another thing that didn't mean anything to her anymore. She let him keep it all, the clothes, the electronics, the expensive watch collection. She didn't care. To her, those things were no longer important. She had something far more valuable, her peace. What Abeni took with her was not material. She walked out of that courtroom with her dignity still intact. She had held her head high the entire time. She never screamed, never cursed, never tried to embarrass him. She stayed graceful. And that grace made her more powerful than any revenge ever could. More than that, she walked out with her empire. ABN Studio was hers. A business she built with her own hands, in silence, from the ground up. It was growing fast, loved by customers and respected by brands. And now, the world knew who was behind it. She didn't need his name. She had made her own. And most importantly, Abeni walked away with peace. True, deep peace. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to prove your worth to someone who never saw it. She was no longer living in someone else's shadow. She was finally standing in her own light. And it felt good. Better than revenge. Better than taking anything from him. She didn't ruin Musa. She didn't expose his secrets to the world. She didn't drag him down the way he had done to her. She simply grew. She rose above the lies, the betrayal, the years of being pushed aside. She outgrew him in every way, emotionally, mentally, and even professionally. And Musa? He had all his things, but what he didn't have anymore was her. He didn't have the woman who once believed in him more than he believed in himself. And that loss, the loss of a woman like Abeni, was something no car, house, or money could replace. She didn't take revenge. She took her crown and wore it with quiet power. 6 months had passed since the divorce, and Musa was sitting alone in a waiting room, waiting for a business meeting that was already running late. He looked around, bored, tapping his fingers on the chair. On the small table in front of him were a few magazines. He picked one up without thinking, flipping through it casually, until he stopped. Right there on the cover was a photo that made his heart skip. It was Abeni, dressed in elegant African fashion, standing tall with confidence in her eyes. She looked nothing like the woman he once ignored. The headline above her read, "Africa's most mysterious fashion queen revealed, meet Abeni, the silent storm." He stared at the cover, frozen. The article promised to tell the story of the quiet woman who built a fashion empire without the world noticing until now. It spoke of her brand, ABN Studio, which had now launched in multiple countries, featured in global fashion weeks, and was praised for blending tradition with modern style. Musa blinked, still in shock. He never imagined she could rise this high. Not without him. Not in silence. And yet, here she was. Not just successful, but celebrated. Not just surviving, but shining. Meanwhile, in another city, Abeni stood in her hotel suite, calmly zipping her suitcase. She had just finished speaking at a major women's leadership event and was getting ready to fly to Paris for a fashion showcase. Her assistant walked in with the same magazine in hand, smiling. "You've seen the cover, right?" Abeni chuckled softly, then looked out the window at the city skyline. She whispered to herself, "They thought I was quiet, but I was just focused." It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about proving to herself that she had always been enough. That silence didn't mean weakness. It meant discipline, focus, power. And now, the world finally knew her name. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's shadow, but as her own person. Abeni, the woman who rose from silence and became a storm no one saw coming. Thanks for listening to Real Stories Diary.